And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 249. Today we're going to be talking about the power of two. Very often when we're photographing, we're fixated on the idea of a single subject. But what happens when you bring a second one into the frame? And for that matter, maybe even a third, a fourth, a fifth, or what have you. So that's really what we're going to be looking at. So if you happen to be watching us live here on Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, then leave a comment down below. Let me know you're here. Tell me what the weather's doing. We can get the chat started and we can make a start. So yes, and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Quick little bit of housekeeping first. In case you're hearing little bits of noise going on in the background, never entirely sure how much this microphone is picking up or not. Today happens to be the Soapbox Derby Day in Castle Douglas, where they have all these soapbox go-karts created and they run down the length of King Street, which also happens to be right past this window here. So there's something of a day going on. There's fair rides and music going and bands playing and what have you. So it's all kind of running on in the background. So hopefully it won't interfere too much. But if you're hearing a bits of noises going on, that's kind of what it's all about. So yes, first, let's make a quick start. I can see we've got people in already, leaving some comments. So let's see who we've got. So April says, greetings from a mostly cloudy day, sun peeking through from Long Island, New York. Susan says, hi from a warm and sunny Kirkcudbright, 26 degrees C today, and that's hot for Kirkcudbright. And it is hot. Well, Kirkcudbright's just 9 miles down the road. It is also that here. Yesterday, I think even cracked 27, 28 degrees, which for this corner of Scotland is absolute heat wave stuff. Now I know for VG in Chennai, then this would actually have a looking around for sweaters and what have you to put in an extra blanket to cope with the cold. But here it's just absolutely sweltering. Heat levels that we don't normally get. So yes, just not used to this kind of weather. Although it has clouded over for the moment. Almost looks like it. I doubt whether there'll be thunderstorms. And then one other last thing, just in case, if all the power suddenly goes off and I stop, bear with me, because in a horrible echo of 6 months ago, my computer has started freezing up and randomly restarting. So I'm hoping it won't happen while we're live in the broadcast. But if it does, it might take me a couple of minutes to get it rebooted and then reconnect, so don't run off too quickly. Right, what else have we got? Janet says, hi from a hot Mississauga with thunderstorms just starting up. Hope I don't lose power in the next hour or so. Well, okay, so it could be you loses power, could be me loses power. So, fingers crossed. Oh, Janet said, I think we went down to 26 degrees last night. Yeah, it's hot. It's kind of warm in the bedrooms at the moment. We're down to just a sheet rather than a quilt. John says, good day from mid-Ohio. Good weather these days. Meg says, good afternoon, everyone. April says, little bits of chat backwards and forwards now about weather and who's getting what. April reckons they're supposed to be getting up to 28 today. Robert says, howdy all from Texas. Anne is with me, and an overcast rainy day at 74 degrees, which I think is, is that about 22 degrees C, give or take a bit. And Anne joins us as well and says hello from a rainy Texas. Excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, just before we make a proper start on what we're talking about today, let's do a quick Smug Points update. So last week was the beginning of the month, so slate cleared, and basically Nadia, Janet and Susan are all on 30 Smug Points each, because each of them sent in an image for critique, and so that gave them 25 Smug Points, and they each turned up and left a comment, so they got an extra 5 Smug Points for that. So they're tied in the front here, 30 points. Everybody else, if you turned up last week and left a comment, you got 5 points. If you didn't, then you're still sitting on 0. So if you want to get onto the leaderboard, leave a comment. Let me know you're here. And if you want to start moving up that leaderboard, well, next week we're going to be doing a feedback session. So there's an option for you to throw in an image for critique, get yourself a bonus 25 Smug Points. And then I'm also going to be setting a challenge for 2 weeks' time. So more about that later in the programme. What else have we got? Robert says, no, it's Texas, that's 74 degrees C. Yeah. But yeah, that would be, I think, everybody would be boiling. Certainly, any alcohol would be evaporating at that point. Right, okay, so what are we talking about today? Today then is the notion of the power of two. Now, okay, let's tell you about where this came from. Actually, just before we get that, one or two of you may have noticed that I've got a little change sitting here. Woody has disappeared, and instead I've got a camera, but not just any old camera. This is a Lego camera that I built yesterday. It was a it was a gift for my birthday from my grandson last October, and finally got around to building it. So yesterday he was staying with us, so we actually sat down and built it together. So quite a fun little camera. But the back comes off. Got a little film you can slot in. The great thing about Lego, of course, is it does all just clip back together. So now, unfortunately, it doesn't actually take real photos. You can't go click, but it's got all the fun things like, the notion that you wind it on and make your adjustments and flick your little lever, little wrist strap. I was quite impressed. It's been quite a bit of fun doing that. So anyway, I think that's now going to take pride of place, just sitting in the back corner. Oh, Nadia's joined us and says, hi, out on a drive, making the best of the nice weather, and we'll catch up later tonight. Okay, catch little bits. Nice to know that you've got in and said hi. Right, okay, so what we're talking about today then is the notion of the power of two. And this came out of originally Anne's suggestion, because Anne won the Smug Points for the last month, and when I asked her what she would like to talk about, she said, breaking the rule of odds by featuring two elements in the frame. The two elements is a style I've managed to have a bit of success with, even though it's a rule breaker. Now, this sort of made me stop and think, is it a rule? Is it a rule of odds? Is it a rule? Is it breaking the rules if you put in an even number instead of an odd number? So that really got me thinking. There's a whole kind of debate here, and one of which I can't remember, we're almost bound to have touched on before, but there's that notion of, are you breaking the rules, or are you just swapping one rule for another? The whole thing about photography and rules, it has to be said, is there are no rules as such, as in absolutes. Whatever you can come up with, somebody somewhere has made a picture which breaks that idea and yet still works. But what we have is guidelines. So like when we talk about the rule of thirds, usually we're talking about how we divide the picture up. We kind of put it into like a tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses grid, and then third. And then generally speaking, if your subject sits on the line which is a third of the way across or a third of the way up, it tends to work better than if it's sitting in the middle or somewhere in between. But it's not an absolute, because sometimes things work very well in the centre, sometimes things work very well off to the side. But by and large, as a rough guide, if you're not sure, start by going a little bit off centre, about a third of the way across, and quite often you can lift the composition of your photo. Now, there are all sorts of things like that we've touched on over the years. Notions of the use of diagonals, use of echoes, use of bracketing, leading lines. And that's before we even get into which direction the light is coming from. But this notion of an odd number of subjects within a photo got me going. It's not one I've ever really overly subscribed to, but I know of it. So I thought, well, okay, this is a chance to really start diving into it. But what we're going to start with is rather than the notion of comparing 2 to 3, I want to compare 2 to 1, because that's where most of us are going to come from. I will move on in the second half of this to that notion of how 2 compares to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and where you can possibly run into problems, and also how you can find solutions. So stick around for that as well. I mean, basically today this is gold. If you're at all interested in this stuff, I'm going to be deep diving into a little bit of this, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff about. Oh, I just saw a soapbox go shooting past there at high speed. Obviously, we're still going on with it. Right, so what we're going to talk about then. So this notion then of, let's say, okay, if I do that and I do that. Quick start here. Generally speaking, when we're taking photos and when we're starting to take photos, mostly what we tend to be doing is focusing on the idea of the single subject. There's something we want to take a photo of. In this case, we've got a young sparrow sitting on a wire, and in fact actually with this there's little specks of rain around it as well. And it's looking a bit fluffy, and so this is a subject. This is the single subject. But, and this is the crucial bit, when we introduce another element into the photo, that element then changes the narrative. That causes some kind of interaction. So when we move to now a second sparrow, in this case looking like a parent sparrow, it looks like it's got like a little ant, flying ant or something in its beak, coming in to now feed, presumably baby sparrow, we've now changed the narrative. There is now something going on. There's more than one subject. So you can't say that the subject is just the sparrow on the wire, or that the subject is the flying sparrow that's coming in. It's the two of them together that are making the narrative. And this is the important thing to understand with this notion of a second or multiple elements in a photo. As I've said many times in the past, that each element in a photo is either contributing to or detracting from the narrative you wish to tell. Marilyn's joined us as well, says hello from Colorado. Glad you could join us, Marilyn. So this notion then that we've moved from one subject to two subjects is quite crucial here. So what I'm going to do now, let's run you through this idea of how a second subject can kind of impact on an image. So here we have, we've got a daisy down in the grass, this one taken with phone. And of course, the great thing about the phones is you can literally just dangle it down into the long grass and get really right down low, sometimes lower than you can with your big fancy camera. Nice little bit of light coming in. And we've got the daisy in the grass. But the crucial bit here is there's another daisy in the background. Here's this second one. Now this one's out of focus. So in one way, yes, this is a single subject photo, but it's not on its own. There's a second subject here, and this second subject is an echo. Okay, it's sort of a reminder of the first subject. So it adds a sense of depth and a bigger narrative than just a single daisy on its own. Okay, let's try another one. Here's a classic, so sweet pea in the rain, or just after the rain, covered in raindrops. Now again, you can have the single flower, or in this case the double flower. And in this case what happens is you've now got two, and these flowers are the same size and on the same focal plane. So you would have the single flower could still be an interesting shot. The double flower though makes it feel it has a different narrative. It means you get the sense of it being a bigger plant. There's a sense of more to it than if you just had the single flower. You would just purely be looking at that one flower. But now you have a sense that there's more going on, and you start kind of looking back and forth, and it sort of expands the narrative almost beyond the photo in this case. Now, April says beautiful sweet pea shot, thank you. And Susan says gorgeous colours of the sweet pea. It really is a gorgeous one, this. Lovely aroma as well. I love the smell of sweet peas, does have to be said. So what about this other idea of pairs and doubles? So you can really play with it if you want, and you can go for that notion of the similarity. This is very similar. So when we've talked, do you remember our talks on symmetry and asymmetry? That idea of looking for symmetry, but where one is just slightly different to the other. So sort of asymmetrical symmetry. This being a perfect case in point. So what we have is we've got these wonderful round stone windows. Sand looks like sandstone in the wall. The window frames are absolutely identical, but the windows on the inside are not. So this one has got a cross in it, this one is just a round sheet of glass, this one is reflecting trees, this one has some kind of frosting or net curtain, frosting and net curtain in it, which means that the reflection is getting very muted. Okay. So what then is creating the interest in this image is the fact that you've got the comparison. Okay, this notion of comparison between one subject and the second subject. Okay, it's not just about the single subject on its own. Another example like this, pair of doors. So this just several houses up the street from that one where the round windows were. So again, we've got a sandstone outing, we've got two doors, different colours. These was taken around Christmas, different wreaths on them, slightly different style, fairly similar style. They both got that kind of arch window bit there. They both got a letterbox in the middle. The door handles are on the opposite sides. So there's similarity and dissimilarity. And this notion of the two together is making you compare the two. You're looking at what the differences are, and those differences are what make it. Whereas if you just had the single image, if you just had the one door, say you were looking just at the door on the left of the picture here, then you would be looking at the framework. You'd probably be drawn much more. You might be trying to make out some of the detail of the wreath. You'd be looking at the patterning on the stonework, things like that. Whereas now the wreath on the left is being compared to the wreath on the right when you are looking at both of them in the same picture. So it has changed and shifted the narrative. And again, it goes from a single door to being a door on a street. Okay, so this second element then is quite an important aspect of it. Here we've got two mushrooms or toadstools. I don't exactly know what variety these are. If there's any experts who want to quickly type in. No, not important enough. The thing is that we have the two mushrooms. The one on the right, rather the one on the left has a hole in it, and a little bit chunk taken out of here. And so they're both pushing up through the leaves. They both got this sort of little bit of grass and background in the park. But what we're noticing is the difference. The first thing that strikes us is what separates. Even though it's two very similar subjects, it's the difference between the subjects which actually becomes the narrative. Okay? And then we can sort of start spreading it out a little bit more. I mean, so this one here, what's this about? So we've got two cars, but if you happen to be in the know, these are both Aston Martins. And this one here is the back of an Aston Martin DB6. And this one here is the back of an Aston Martin Vantage. Now your DB6 comes from the 1960s. The Aston Martin Vantage is, this is probably certainly less than 20 years old. It's certainly post-millennium. So, there's a good 50 years between these two cars. And so part of the narrative here then is the fact that you've got two cars, you've got two rears of cars, but they're related by the fact that they're both Aston Martins. Now, if you're not into cars and you're not into Aston Martins, then this photo won't do anything for you. If you're a little bit of a gearhead, then this photo becomes quite exciting. And what you're trying to do then is the story is the comparison between the two cars. So 50 years between them, one's green, one's red, one's old, one's new. They've got their different shapes, but they've both got that Aston Martin badge. Oh, not that one. On it, which is the important bit. Okay. Now, you can do something. The next bit I'm kind of want to move on to there. Well, what I'm starting to move on to with the last one is you've got the difference and you compare with the difference. But then what you also have is you have the relationship. Now, in this case, we've got two horses in a misty field. And just around sunrise, it's cold, a little frost on the ground, in the middle of winter, and we've got the two horses. And so that's fine, that's a two-horse shot. But another two-horse shot, a very different kind of two-horse shot, is this one. And in this case, it's not just the case that there's two horses, but it's the fact that they're essentially nuzzling each other as well. That there's a relationship going on between the two subjects. And the relationship isn't just that they happen to be occupying the same photo, or that they're occupying the same photo and they're slightly different versions of a similar thing. But there is actually a power and a relationship between the two horses. So this is a little bit more like going back to the swallows, where it's not just a case of having two swallows. The fact that you know, one of them looks slightly fluffier and younger, and the other one has got the flying ant in his beak, is showing us this notion of that there's a narrative of backwards and forwards between them. Now, let me show you what happens here when we take something like, so here's two starlings, two very wet starlings on a very wet day, sitting on top of a bird feeder. Now, I have two versions of this photo, one of which is the original, one of which is photoshopped, and right in this moment I can't remember which is which, but what I will show you here is this version here where we have the two starlings. They're both starlings, they're both the same size. The difference is they are looking in opposite directions. This starling on the right is got its back to us, this one is side on to us. In the background there's you know, a brick wall out of focus. But look what happens when we do this one. Now this is the photoshopped version, I think. I think that was the original. And I had this as an original, and I thought, well, what would happen if they were actually facing each other? So I essentially chopped it in half, swapped it around, did a little bit of Photoshop magic to make sure that the middle bit didn't look like it was too cut out, and that the hoops run over across each other, so that helps bind it together. And this is the same, these are the same starlings taken from the same photo, but what we've done is swap them. And in this one, they're looking away from each other, they're not interested in each other, it's two starlings occupying the same space-ish. In this one, you now really get a powerful feeling of an interaction. Okay, that they're eyeing each other up, that they're about, you know, maybe they're about to say something, or they're in agreement with something, or they're about to fall out about something. You can start imposing whatever kind of narrative you want on it. Yeah, John says that he reckons that facing each other works better. And I think it does as well. And I think when I've sort of stuck this into something like PhotoCrowd or ViewBug type competitions, then challenges, this version tends to work better than this version, because we've now got an interaction, and it's this interaction which I think really starts to have, it is where one of the big strengths can come with the power of two subjects in the photo. So you've got that notion like the mushrooms or the windows of comparison of what's the difference, and then you can have the two subjects and how they interact with each other. There you go, picture of the back of me and the back of my daughter Meg. So this was taken, 2006, gosh, yeah, 19 years ago. And here we've got two subjects, and what we've got here is the difference. We've got a difference, so larger father, smaller daughter, but we're holding hands. There's a connection, okay? The two subjects is what makes this photo. Remove Meg from the photo, you've just got the back of a man. Remove me from the photo, you've just got the back of a wee girl going in for a paddle. And maybe either of those is quite an interesting photo, but neither of them will be anything like as interesting as the fact that you have that dynamic here of the father and daughter holding hands as they wade into the sea. Okay. Similarly, husband and wife dressed up, doing a kind of dance, going for a kind of Ginger Rogers kind of Fred Astaire vibe photo shoot I did for them. And we're playing around with that sort of Hollywood fun. But again, it's not about an individual, it's about the couple. It's about the fun of them together, how they're interacting with each other, but at the same time, while they're interacting, while he's looking at her, she's looking at the camera. So there's the difference, and there's the relationship, and there's the interaction, and there's the what you feel is coming before, coming afterwards. Another picture of me and Meg, probably again similarly, probably about 18 years ago or so. And here again, so here we are, two subjects, nose to nose, daddy, daughter, relationship. Not to let my wife feel missed out. One of Maggie's favourite photos of her. this one here, obviously, so there's the two of us in the photo, but you can barely see Maggie because of the hair blowing across her face. So all these photos are the power of 2, okay? And it's not about 3, and it's not about 1. It is very specifically about two subjects and how those subjects are relating to each other. Okay, so there is a strong sense here, I think, of the idea that 2 isn't necessarily a diminishment of 3. So Anne's point, to run back a little bit to Anne's point, where Anne was coming at 2 for the notion of 2 is because very often, sometimes particularly camera clubs, or you see kicking about, is this idea of the notion that 3 or 5, maybe even 7 is better than 2, 4 or 6 subjects. And I'm going to move on to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But what I'm trying to say is that while there may be something in the notion of the difference between 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, I think 2 occupies a space of its own. It's not the same as a 4. I mean, it can be, you can have evenness, but it occupies a different kind of philosophical, psychological space. So 2 is not the same as 4. 2 is its own number in the same way. If you want to play around with particular analogies, think of the idea of prime numbers. 1 is a prime number. 2 is a prime number. Every other even number, 4, 6, 8, 242, is not a prime number. But 2, even though it's even, is a prime number. And 2 has its own special qualities. It's not the equivalent of just half of 4. And very often when we come to 2 subjects, we're coming to 2 subjects up from the idea of a single subject. So again, you take this, so this is my son Rogan on the right, this is my grandson Cormac on the left. Again, this one was taken, I don't know, probably about 14 years ago, something like that. Remove either of them and you don't have the photo, not a photo with this kind of level and depth that's going on. So this is the point that I really want you to be thinking about, because I'm going to be setting a challenge at the end of this podcast for 2 weeks' time. So getting you, what I'm trying to do here is to get you thinking while we're looking at this, because we're going to have the challenge for the power of 2. I want you to find 2 elements. And this notion then, that are the elements very similar but slightly different, like the windows or the swallows or the starlings, or are the elements really quite different, but there's a powerful notion of what combines the 2 elements, what brings the 2 elements together? Is it like the cars, that they both happen to have an Aston Martin badge, or is it like this, where it's about the bond, it's about the way they are looking at each other? What have we got? April, how cute! What a great shot! Your famous shot. I guess actually talking probably about Maggie at that point. Robert says, I love the photo of you. Meg says, thank you. And Anne says, I love the concept that 2 elements make a single subject. Yeah, it's that notion of the relationship between them. And it's that relationship and the comparison that makes a difference. I mean, I've had reasonable success with this one in challenges entitled things like large and small, big and small, looking at each other, relationships, that kind of thing. So the dynamic, either the comparison or the relationship, that is your subject. And then in this case, these 2 are the elements that are making up the subject. The overall subject is that relationship or that comparison. So, but you can even take it a step further, where if you have something like this, here you've got 2 elements. So we've got the lighthouse and we've got the rainbow. Okay, and these now vastly different, except for the fact that what we're doing here is that they both poke up out of the scene approximately the same kind of size, approximately the same kind of distance from the edges. Okay, so sort of you moving your camera around to try and get something here. And again, you can remove the rainbow and it's still quite a nice photo. You could remove the lighthouse and it would be an okay photo. But there's something about the way the 2 of them come together. So you've got the rainbow. So on a visual level, the rainbow is balancing out the lighthouse. But then on a slightly deeper level, on a weather elemental level, rainbow is a weather pattern. And a weather pattern is also very much tied into what is a lighthouse about. Okay, so you're adding extra layers of depth to the story for anybody who's interested in reading it. So that's the kind of thing that I really wanted to start you off with, is this notion then that for most of the time what we're doing is we're moving from the notion of 1 to 2. So there's the single subject, which is all about the single subject, the single flower, the single door, the single swallow. And then we move on to 2 subjects. And those 2 subjects then are all about the relationship between the 2 of them. And that can be the comparison. These 2 look very similar, except there are slight differences. And so we really zero in on what those differences are. Or it can be about the relationship and how the 2 of them are actually interacting with each other. Robert says the rainbow and lighthouse shot is great, my style. Thanks, John. So let's play around a little bit with numbers, because that's where I'm kind of coming at from the beginning. So what I want to do now is talk about that notion to sort of tap into more where Anne came at it from her question, or her original point, which is this notion of when you have that idea of people telling you that an odd number is better than an even number. And let's flip over to Photoshop that, right? Let's say here's a photo, right? So we've got a single daisy taken from straight down, sitting in the middle of the picture. Okay, so we've got 1. We've got the power of 1. So what I'm going to do is I will duplicate that layer for a moment. I'm going to go to select subject, and if I'm very lucky, it will just select that for me. Close enough. I'm not going to play around. This is just a rough guide here. I'm going to copy that and paste it onto another. Now what I'm going to do, just so I can play around with this, is I'm going to go back to this layer and just basically delete it. Okay, so now when I put this back on, we've got a single flower. And if I want, I can move it around. Now, normally with a single subject, we'd either zoom in close, having it in the middle, or we might, if we wanted to do it rule of thirds, we might stick it there, or there, or there, or there. So that's what we're going to do with 1 subject. But what if we then have 2? So I'm going to duplicate that layer, so I can pull this one over, and now we have 2. So what we might do with 2 is we might have them nicely balanced in the middle like that. But yeah, it kind of feels, well, are you necessarily getting anything else out of it? Now, because this daisy absolutely is identical to this daisy. Maybe if we turned it round, maybe if we colour shifted it slightly, you get a slightly different thing. But there's, not a lot going on here. What we could do is maybe move it diagonally, and I think that starts to introduce a slightly more interesting element. And I'm going to come on. I'll talk about maybe a little bit more about that a little bit later in the podcast. I want to talk about how you can get around and make what is in essence, an even number, and make it a little bit more interesting. But let's up this again. Let's go to 3. Well, now we've got 3 elements. Do you see how different that suddenly makes it? That we were fine with 1, 2 is kind of okay, but 3 is now more about shape. Okay, we're getting triangles, we're getting diagonals between them. And if you remember, when everything we talked about, that notion of diagonals, is diagonals tend to add an energy, a slight more energy to an image, in the way that horizontal or vertical tends to add stability to an image. So, well, this is the way we've got it. However, we could, if we wanted, we could just as easily put these 3 in a row. And then we've got 3, but yeah, it's less interesting. Whereas, if we throw them off a little bit, pretty much however we lay them out, they end up in a kind of triangular form, unless we force them into, an upright or a... So 3, but I think the 3 tends to just generally feel a little bit more interesting, okay? What happens if we go to 4? So now we've got 4. 4 somehow isn't quite as interesting. And certainly if I decide to just put them into a little square-ish, something like that. It's kind of meh. So what? This isn't going to be winning any competitions. Well, none of these are going to be winning any competitions, but you can be fairly certain that if you're in a rankings of daisies on a piece of grass, whilst none of these are versions that are ever going to make the top 10%, you can imagine somewhere around somewhere along the line, the 4 isn't actually working quite as well as the 3. The 3 has, because it's not balanced, has a slight kind of tension to it. The 4 becomes balanced and it sort of stops feeling as tense. And if we really want to do something with it, the best we can maybe try and do is, if we create a diagonal, we do more of a diamond shape, or we maybe try and have an outlier, 3 over here, 1 over there. So we're moving on to how do we make it a bit more interesting. Let's go up 1 again. And let's say we've got 5. Oh, well, no, suddenly 5 actually becomes slightly more interesting again, because it makes it very, very difficult to balance. Okay, now we can do the 4 and have the 1 in the middle like that. And actually, but even though that's balanced, it's still slightly interesting because we've got the diagonals. I think if we put it more into that, it's slightly less interesting. Okay, so Susan says, I can't tell you how often judges at my camera club tell us that 3 is better than 2. I've occasionally entered images with 2 elements, only to be told, lovely, but I wish it was 3. Yeah, this is the very thing I'm trying to challenge. So yeah, I get where you're coming from here, Susan, but this is, like I said, exactly what I'm trying to challenge, which is the whole point. And what you've said there is exactly where Anne is coming from too. We're told 3 is better than 2, but 2 is what I'm saying is unique. 2 is all about the relationship between the 2 elements, okay? But once we get into 3, 3's good, 4 is boring, 5 becomes interesting. Let's just duplicate that again. And, oh, now I've lost, there we go. Now we've got 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, maybe. Certainly if we decide to actually create an evenness with them, that's boring as well. So we've kind of really got to start trying to mix it up a bit. And then maybe, let's make sure I know where I'm going. 7. Bring a 7th one. Oh, actually starts to become slightly more interesting again. So there is an element here. There's a big element whereby actually, for whatever reason, well, for the reasons that we are talking about, odd numbers tend to feel slightly more interesting than even numbers. And this is where that comes from your camera clubs. And the 100,000 articles you will read on the internet about photography. And it is true that by and large, 3 works better than 4, 5 works better than 4, 5 works better than 6, 7 works better than 6, 7 probably works better than 8. But there is a point here whereby it can kind of get a bit too... Once you get above a certain number, it stops counting, to be honest. Let's show you another version here. What I'm going to do, and let's just close that. Let's go to one of my old Peaky Blinders shots, right? So now what I've done here with this is I've created several layers and I've eliminated some of the other. So this is a shot. So here we have single woman walking towards the camera in a smoke-filled, backlit old warehouse, right? And so what I want you to think about, as I'm going to take you through this, is to think about what your first thoughts are with the narrative, right? And your narrative with this single woman walking through this environment, it's all about her and the environment she's in, okay? What happens then if we introduce her friend? Now you've got 2 women walking through. How different is that? Okay, it changes it completely, right? A woman on her own walking towards the camera, 2 women together walking towards the camera. It is now all about these 2 women together. There is something about you cannot help but create a relationship between these 2 women. Okay, and that's changing your sense of narrative. What if we introduce a 3rd one? Now we've got 3 women coming together. Yes, there's a relationship between the 3, but we're kind of moving into the notion of group. Okay, group. And this is a key word here. Group dynamics. Okay. Now, a group can essentially be 3 and upwards. 2 is not a group. 2 is a couple. Okay. And psychologically, there's a huge difference that a couple is more like one. The couple is the entity, and that relationship and balance and everything else, everything I was just talking about. Whereas 3 is a group. We're starting to, now it's a very small group. It's the smallest group you can get, because I wouldn't count 2 as a group. If you said a group of people came down the road, and it turns out it's 3, you kind of go, oh, okay then, not as many as I was expecting, but I'll give you that. Whereas if you said a group of people coming down the road and there was 2 of them, you'd be going, where's the group? Okay, just the way we use language, so you know that. But once we get to 3, there's a kind of a group dynamics. Okay, so now we've got a small, admittedly small group walking towards the camera. What if we had another one? What if we get a 4? Okay, now we've got 4, but we've got 4. Is there anything significantly different, really, in terms of the energy and the narrative between 4 of them and 3 of them? And I would say not. I mean, the narrative changes dramatically from 1 to 2. The narrative changes again quite dramatically from 2 to 3. But when you go from 3 to 4, it doesn't. Okay? And this is a kind of the important bit that, okay, maybe shifts it slightly, but you're not getting, this is a majorly different photo. If we go from 4 to 5, actually, I mean, it's not changing the subject much, but the group is feeling slightly bigger. It's feeling more substantial than 3, but the 4, yeah, the 5 works a little bit better. We are back to this notion of the odd numbers are working better than the even numbers. Not that the 3 is working better than the 2. The 3 is different to the 2, but the 5 does work better than the 4, whereas the 4 doesn't have much significant difference than the 3. And then if we add another one, a 6th one, like the shift from 3 to 4, there's not much goes on. There's not a lot of difference between 5 to 6 either. Okay? And you can carry on with this and carry on with this until ultimately, but if you end up with something like, in this case, we now have 11 subjects. We've got 10 and a horse, right? At this point, it doesn't make any difference whether you've got, whether it's 10, whether it's 11, whether it's 12. And this is a kind of a key aspect to this notion of your rule of odds, or how odds are mucking around, are interacting or different to evens. Okay, so that actually, in reality, it only makes a difference to a certain extent. It only makes a difference between really 3 and about 7, maybe 8, and 8 and 9. I think we're right at the very fringes of the point that anybody can tell the difference. Okay, there comes a point whereby the numbers are just too big and we're fading out. So 1, single subject, really important. 2, massive difference, because it's all about the difference and the relationship and the interaction and how the 2 of these combine to create a 3 is now group dynamics, and it's changed again, and it's about this sense of multiple elements coming together and how they're all feeding off each other. 4 is now we're into the evens versus odds, and evens versus odds is very similar to the notion of horizontals and verticals versus diagonals. Okay, so if you think of, we've talked before, horizontals and verticals create stability, diagonals create an energy, create a tension. And inherently, odd numbers are more tense, are less stable than even numbers. And we know this because a triangle feels inherently more unstable than a square. A square is the ultimate solidity, right? Getting to 5, it's sort of, it's a little bit kind of, the pentangle is, it's not quite right. 6, a hexangle, actually that starts to even up a little bit. We've got our honeycombs, we've got a very familiar shape again. 7, 7 just feels a little bit odd. By the time we get to 8 or 9, it doesn't make any difference. It's just a lot of edges, and it's stopped having any real impact. So it's a key thing to understand this. Was a Oh, John says, I see that environment working well for a steampunk shot. Yep, oh, yeah, I'm sure it would. So let's run you through, let me just show you what I mean by some of these. So if we go to something like this, so here we go, back to starlings. Now we've got 3 starlings. Now, with this kind of shot, you've got 3 birds out again sitting on top of the bird feeder. Honestly, to me, they look like they're about to mug you. There's something quite, you know, almost vicious about them. You can see where, you know, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds starts to kind of bring itself together, especially this one on the end here. Ooh, I think it's got this real kind of slightly vicious look to them. Now, but as a single bird on its own, that's one shot. 2 birds together, we've got a different shot. 3 birds together, we're now into a group, and it works as 3. But a 4th one isn't really going to change, isn't going to add so much to that. One of the things you often find with things like band shots is again, 3 people tends to work well. So to come back to that notion of 3 and 5 tend to be quite good numbers. So here the 3 just gives you a kind of an interesting, pleasant shape, though a kind of sequence to it. 5 in a band as well, that's working quite well. That's sort of, you know, we've got this sort of sense of a group, a sense of movement. That odd number is helping with it. 7. Okay, so, okay, we're just missing greed out on the top here because my head's sitting in over the top. But now we've got 7 elements into it. But in order to make sense of that 7, I've had to kind of divide it up. But there is also this notion that I'm throwing in the diagonals as well, in the kind of W zigzaggy shapes of how they're arranged around the picture. So we're up to 7, okay? Then we get up to 9, and at this point it doesn't matter. Is there 9? Is there 8? We've got 9 if we count little Fred here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But to be honest, if Fred wasn't there, you're not going to really notice any difference. And whether that's 8 or whether that's 9, whether that's 10, whether that's 11, we've moved out of the realm where it makes a difference. And this is the bit, is the where does it make a difference? 1 makes a difference, 2 makes a difference, 3 makes a difference, 4 doesn't really tend to make much difference. 5 makes a difference, 6 doesn't. 7, we're kind of now more or less at the edge of it. 8, 9, 10, 11, multiple, no longer really makes a difference. So when we go on to something like this, who cares whether it's odd or even? Is anybody going to sit down and work it out? Okay, so this is the really important bit. You've got to kind of, when somebody turns around, whether it's somebody at the camera club or somebody who puts themselves in a position of superior knowledge or whatever, or somebody who's going to berate you for your choice of number, are they right in the sense that you go, well, you know what, actually, if I'd had 5 instead of 4, it would have fitted better, or 3 instead of 4, it would have worked better? Or is it a case of that they're just going on the idea of some rule that they've heard elsewhere and they're just repeating without truly understanding what it's about? And this is what I'm trying to get you to understand today, is what it is actually about. That yes, absolutely, 3, 5, and I would say maximum 7 tend to work better than 4 and 6. Okay? 8, we're kind of now moving into the outer regions again where it stops making a difference. But it's this is where it's all really happening. This is where the power of it is. When you come into something like this, there's a whole sea of sheep. What we actually do here is we're back into 1. So this is the 1 sheep where it's looking at the camera. Okay, and it's in focus. So our eye gets drawn to this particular sheep face. So although there's a whole mass here, in the end, this is back to 1 subject. Okay, because we're not really looking at the other sheep as subjects. They are support, they are background and environment to the single sheep that's actually turning around and staring at the camera. Hope this is all making sense. So, with that in mind, by and large, yes, 3, 5, 7 tends to work better than 4 and 6. They don't necessarily work better than 2 because you're not comparing like with like. 2 doesn't work necessarily better than 1 any more than 1 necessarily works better than 2. It depends on the image that you're taking. And 3 doesn't necessarily work better than 2 or vice versa because it's a different kind of photo. 3 plus is group dynamics. 2 is couple dynamics. Okay? 4, 5, 6 and 7 are also group dynamics. Once you get above 8, 9, 10, 11, it's mass dynamics, which is there's a whole seething mass of stuff. Where's my eye going to get drawn within that mass? Understanding that that's how it's working, I think, really helps elevate your deeper understanding of what you're doing with your photography, and that will help you to go, well, actually, you know what, let's shift the camera left or right to include this element or to make sure that element isn't included. Do I want the energy of a 357? Do I want to make one thing stand out in the mass? Do I want the couple energy? Do I want the single energy? Do I want a now? So what happens though if you're stuck with an even number? What happens if you're stuck with, forgetting 2, what if you're stuck with 4 or 6? Is there anything you can kind of do with that? Now, there is. So I just want to kind of give you a couple of pointers here for if and when you find yourself with that. So you've been asked to photograph 4 people, or you've got 4 drinks on a table, that kind of thing. So here's an interesting one with 4. Oh, that's what I want to do. Yeah. Here's an interesting one with 4 elements, or 3 elements, or 3.5 elements. This is a kind of an interesting one. Is this a 3? Is this a 4? Because what we've got here is the shadows of 3 camels. We've also got 3 people, but because the rear camel doesn't have a person on it. So we've only actually got 2 camels with riders on them, and then 1 person leading the camels, and then 1 spare camel on the back. So we've got 3 people and 3 camels, but we've got 4 shadows. How do you want to count it? How would your person at the camera club or the person who's judging you, would they say that this is a dynamic of 3 or this is a dynamic of 4? So you can kind of play it up, mix it around a little bit, and it creates a more interesting element. And perhaps this is slightly more interesting than if it was just 2 camels with 2 people on it, or 3 camels even with 3 people on it. We've got this sort of funny shift in between but there is a certain sense of group dynamic with this. Or this one, now there are in fact actually 5 mince pies here, but the 5th one is actually tucked behind here, propping up this one here. So for all intents and purposes, what we have is 4 mince pies, or 3.5. Okay, so what we've done here is we've got 3, our rule of 3, if you like. We've got 3 together, but at the same time we've got this one here, but with a bite out of it. So it's not the same as the 3 others. So it's a 3 plus 1, or 3.5. But that 3 plus 1 is another way of playing around with a 4 dynamic, of how you break it up. For anybody who's into music, anybody who's into rhythm, drumming, or anything like that, there's all these kind of things about how you introduce, you might have a regular rhythm, but how you break up that rhythm, throwing in, there's not just a case of you've got 4/4 beats, 2/4 beats, 3/4 beats, you have 6/8 beats, but you can also do all sorts of things where you're going 1, 2, 3, gap, 1, 2, 3, gap, or, 1 gap, 3, 4. So, that 3 plus 1, or 3 plus a bit, or is another way of playing around with that shape. Another thing here, is to throw, some of you may remember, this is a band I was in many years ago. I split up about 10, 12 years ago, but we're called Scruffy Buzzards. And we wanted to we needed a band image, and this was where you're typically going 4 blokes in front of a garage door looking moody. But 4 blokes, we were only 4 in the band, you end up with, even though I'm trying to introduce a sense of diagonals and what have you into this, there's a limit to how interesting it's going to be. This was the shot we ended up making the cover out of. This is all now edited up. And we've got the 4, but there's this what we've done is we've introduced all the diagonals. We've introduced, because the 4 is naturally a kind of a stable number, we've upended that by really ramping up the diagonals and the energy into it so that it looks like everybody's kind of beating each other up with the instruments. Okay. So, April says, I like that cover shot. Yeah, it did well. A good cover shot actually gets people far more interested. We had a lot of success with this cover shot. Whole other story. I won't go off on the tangent just now. But that notion, though, that if you've got 4 or 6, but we're going to, this notion of 4, and it's which normally would be, well, maybe it's just not got enough energy. Think about the other tricks you have in your toolbox to add the energy into it. Okay, so ramping up your diagonals is one of the ways of doing it. Another one, some of you may remember this one, another 4-piece band. This one, there's diagonals in this, but there's a lot of movement in it as well. This is all about flowing leading lines. So again, and on top of that, again, we've got a 3+1 combination. So these 3 guys on the outside are all wearing white shirts. This guy in the middle is wearing a black jacket. He's dressed differently to them. These 3 are all focused on the guy in the middle. The guy in the middle is looking straight out at us. Okay, so we've taken the one element, so we made it a 3+1 rather than the complete 4. But then they all combine by the fact that he's combing his hair, but this, the comb and what have you, is creating a line that's drawing us around here. We've got the coffee pot, which is drawing us around here. We've got the arm coming round, drawing us back up to here to light the cigar. The cigar is pointing us over towards Ali's eyes. Ali's eyes are also running up over the coffee pot. Davy's eyes are drawing our gaze down towards the coffee pot as well, and his tie is adding a line in. And Fergus's glasses are running this little line coming down here as well. So there's a lot of lines within this which are drawing our eye into it, round it, through it, back around it. It's bracketed, it's, we've got everybody's facing inwards, so your eye never leaves. It's like once you're into the vortex, you're kind of constantly going around it. Okay, so even though it's got 4 elements, we've broken that up considerably by using leading lines, by using diagonals, by using 3+1 combinations. Okay, so 4 doesn't have to be the death of your picture just because you couldn't make it 3 or 5. Now, another way you can go about it is to take that notion of the evenness and play with it. So in this case, we've got Alice in Wonderland style photography this was done for a high school enterprise group who had created these cake stands using vintage plates, and the theme we wanted to go with was this sort of Alice in Wonderland look. And what we've done here, again, we've got 4 characters, but we've deliberately taken that notion of the mirror image, the asymmetrical symmetry, to play with it. So we have, the shape is curving the same. He's looking out, she's looking out. He's looking across here, he's looking in, she's looking in. But they're looking slightly differently. She's looking down at the cake while she's grabbing one. He's looking at her. He's looking at him. She's also looking down, kind of glancing down. We've got sandwiches on each side, cakes on each side, bits in the middle. So the cake stands are creating an evenness. We've shot them evenly, but the fact that you've got the people around, we're creating this sort of semi-mirror image, but we're breaking it as well because they're not the same, that it's not an absolute mirror. And then we did the same thing. Some of you may remember this one as well, one of the butler shots I did, where we've got 6 people, and we're completely playing with that idea of symmetry. We've got that notion of almost a leaf shape where it comes down and then comes out at the bottom with the girls around Lord and Lady Hoosie and Crawford peeking up with the butlers. Okay, so we're very deliberately playing with that notion of symmetry, but it's broken because the people on each side are different. Especially here, so we've got the butlers. They're both butlers, but he's a little bit taller, slightly different complexion, hairstyle. He's holding out the cup while he's holding the tray. We've got Lord and Lady, female, male, gazing at each other. The 2 girls, much more similar in shape, holding this together, but she's got her legs tucked under her, she's sitting cross-legged. So we've got all these differences while superficially appearing the same. So the point being with all this is that if you do end up with 4 elements or 6 elements and you fear the idea that it could just be too static, you also have these other tools in your box. You can go for symmetry and play with it and break it and kind of break expectations with it, or just so it's symmetry but asymmetrical symmetry, which we've talked about on a couple of different podcasts before now. So it's different but not quite and it's that not quite which is going to make you look again. So if you go back similarly to the notion of the couple images, where we had the 2 windows, where you've got 2 windows which are seemingly identical except for the fact that the reflection is different. Okay, or you've got the 2 mushrooms where one of them has got the hole in it. Okay, these ideas of almost identical but not quite, that's what's making the relationship. And you can do that with 4s and 6s as well. Okay, so I hope this is all making sense. So to summarise then, traditionally we come in with the idea of the single subject, but when you bring in 2 subjects, the 2 subjects have their own couple dynamic. And what happens is we start comparing the 2, are they similar but different? What are the differences? But we also then, there can be the relationship between the 2. They don't have to be 2 similar things but slightly different. They can be vastly different things but are connected in some way. And we're looking for that connection because our brains are wired to look for that connection. As soon as we bring any other element into the image, we can't help ourselves but create a relationship between that image. And that's why I constantly say every element that's in your photo is either adding to or detracting from the narrative you want to tell. And you have to be aware of the narrative that you're trying to put across and whether all the elements that are in it are supporting it or detracting from it. When we go up to 3 now becomes group dynamics. And at this point, generally speaking, 3, 5 and 7 tend to work better than 4 and 6, in the same way that, generally speaking, diagonals tend to work better than horizontals and verticals if you're wanting to add a level of energy, dynamism to the picture, tension to the picture. When you do 4 and 6, it creates more symmetrical, it makes it kind of calm down a bit, and it's harder to get that kind of energy. But that's not to say that you can't. You can do by breaking it up with like 3 and 1, or you play with that notion of the symmetry and undermine it. So these are all different ways you can play with it. So, I mean, honestly, this is absolute gold dust. I hope you're finding it useful and interesting. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. With all this in mind, I'm now going to set the power of 2 challenge. I'm not going to worry about evens and odds. Maybe that's for another one. But specifically for this challenge, for 2 weeks' time, is the power of 2. I want you to take a photo, or if you really do not have time, go and crawl through your archives and find something interesting which has 2 key subjects. And it's something about what is relating those subjects. Is it that they're very similar but slightly different? Is it that they're really quite different but there's something pulling them together? So the power of 2 is what this challenge is about. I need you to get your image. So that is, what's the 13th today? So that'll be the 27th of July. Get your images into me by no later than Friday the 25th. Saturday morning, really add an absolute push, but please, the earlier you can get them in, the easier it is. Don't forget, everybody who sticks an entry in gets a bonus 10 smug points. And then on top of that, I'll be picking out my favourite, the ones that really grab me the most. There's an extra bonus 30, 20 and 10 smug points, and maybe even a couple of commendeds of 5 bonus points there. So it's a place for you to really move yourself up the Smug Points Leaderboard. So the power of 2 then is the challenge for 2 weeks' time. And next week, we will be having a feedback session. So this is your chance. And if you want to play with one of these idea of power of 2, send it in to me to get a sense of where something's working, where something's not working. Or if it can be, it doesn't have to be that, it can be any topic you like. Send me your image. This is really where you will learn so much, is when you can get that proper feedback on your photography. So send me your images for next week. I can have up to 4 spaces for a feedback session. And generally speaking, first come, first served. So the earlier you get your image to me, the more likely you are to be included in that feedback session. And of course, with the feedback session, you get a bonus 25 smug points as well. So if you're not there with Nadia, Susan, and whoever else it was who's got 30, Marilyn, I think, or was it Janet? Janet, yes. Janet, Susan, and Nadia currently sitting at their head. If you want to rush in, then get something in for feedback next week, and then get something in for the challenge the following week. And of course, if you are Nadia, Susan, or Janet, then get your things in to try and keep your lead. Right, so with all that in mind, if you found these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, to submit your images for the feedback and for the challenge, you can either put them in the Facebook group, the Flickr group, both of which are Flickr or Facebook /groups/UPwKA, or you can email me kim@kimayres.co.uk. Send your images through in these ways. And of course, don't forget, if like the video, make sure you click like on this, help the algorithms, and subscribe and tell your friends and all that kind of stuff. So thank you to each of you for turning up. Thank you for your comments. Thank you to Anne for this one. It was a really interesting question. It really made me sort of stop and reflect and go, well, okay, why are people saying 2 instead of 3? When really, I think it's more a case of 2 instead of 1. That's where your real, choice tends to be made. Because where it should be maybe 3 instead of 4, and I can understand that, or 5 instead of 4. But 2 has its own world, is its own realm, and isn't compared to 3 in that sense. If somebody's saying there's 2, shame it isn't 3, they've missed the point. They haven't understood the dynamic of the photo. Or maybe you haven't explained it well enough in your photo. But that it's about understanding that. So thank you ever so much to everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.